Welcome. Today we're going to talk about ways that cells transport materials into and outside of the cell itself. So the first kind of transport that's used is called passive transport. Passive transport is also referred to as diffusion. Diffusion is the process where molecules move on their own and there's no added effort put forward by the cell. Your cell can use passive transport for anything that's small enough to move through the cell membrane. And really, what's small enough are really the small molecules. Oxygen, carbon dioxide, water, salt can move through the cell membrane without any kind of effort on the cell's part. And so cells don't usually use effort unless they need to. And so we're going to get oxygen and carbon dioxide being transported by diffusion without much effort on the cell's part. Molecules are always going to move from areas of high concentration to areas of low concentration. So you can see in the graphic, we have a number of purple dots on the outside of the cell, and they are moving from the area of high concentration to the area of low concentration. Down here inside the cell, they're very low in concentration. So then we have to talk about solution gradients and the three basic kinds of solutions. There are solutions where the cell has a more concentrated environment than the solution around it, and those are called hypotonic solutions. There is the situation where the cell and the material that surrounds it are the same in concentration, and so we don't have a concentration gradient. Those are called isotonic solutions, and so things don't tend to move in isotonic solutions. We also have a situation where the solution outside of the cell is more concentrated than the cell, and so we call that a hypertonic solution. And so in this image you can see the way red blood cells react to those kinds of solutions. The isotonic red blood cells in the center are the correct shape. The hypotonic red blood cells have actually burst because the water has moved and caused the cells to swell and pop. In hypertonic situation, where the outside is more concentrated than the inside, the water tends to move from the inside of the cell outwards. And so you can see we get this wrinkling effect on the edge of the cell membrane because the water is moving out of the cell trying to balance so that we would have the same concentration inside and outside of the cell. Anything else that is too big to move through the cell membrane or the cell wall all on its own needs some transport proteins. So here we have Jim. He's got some transport proteins, and that allows him to transport himself outside of the cell. Cheesy, but it gets the point across. Facilitated diffusion is used for big molecules, and the big molecules need one of those transport proteins. They need a membrane crossing protein, some protein that goes from once inside the cell and outside the cell to allow things to go through. And so we're really talking about big things here. We're talking about amino acids are big. Glucose is big. And you can have facilitated diffusion where we just have a hole that's big enough for the amino acids to pass through, or we can have a more gated kind of a membrane protein that allows one piece of a substance through at a time. The other kind of transport that membrane crossing proteins are used for is called active transport. And active transport has to use the cell's energy, and you're using the cell's energy, and at this point we're going to use it to go against the gradient. So as you can see in this graphic, we have a hydrogen on the inside of the cell. We want to pump that back out of the cell into the extracellular fluid, into the space outside of the cell. So we're going to use some energy, some ATP, to go move against the gradient. And active transport is always used when we're trying to push something against a gradient, because then we really have to use effort to move that molecule, because it's not the natural direction the molecule would travel. So active transport is when we're going to move molecules against the concentration gradient. In summary, we have three different kinds of transport. We have two kinds of passive transport, diffusion and facilitated diffusion. And then we have one type of active transport, which is involving ATP. And you can see here we're moving these molecules against the concentration gradient. Right now in your notes, I would like you to create a table to summarize what you have learned and to fill in columns. We're going to have one column for active transport, one column for facilitated transport and one column for diffusion. And then you're just going to say, does it move against the gradient? Yes or no? Yes or no? Yes or no? Does it require a membrane protein? Yes or no? Yes or no? Yes or no? Does it require energy? And is osmosis an example? Osmosis is the term that we use to describe the movement of water. So I'll let you go back over the video if you need to figure out which one of those three that osmosis is an example of.